How do you stop loving a man who does nothing but cause you pain? The answer is brutal, but incredibly liberating. You aren't beloving too much, you are chemically addicted. Your attachment to a toxic man isn't a tragic fairy tale, it's a trauma loop. Today, we apply reverse engineering to destroy this dependency. It sounds entirely counterintuitive, but ignoring him is the absolute and only way to finally be heard. When his deafening silence leaves you abandoned in the cold, this video is your definitive cure. I am going to reveal the exact psychological mechanisms to break this spell immediately, granting you a swift, powerful reclamation of your absolute clarity and sovereignty. If you are ready to witness his emotional hold over you completely evaporate, listen very closely to what follows. Let us be brutally honest for a moment. You sit there, completely drained, wondering why your heart fiercely clings to a man who consistently tears it apart. You probably tell yourself that this intense, agonizing ache is just the price of profound, all-consuming love. But as your mentor, I must pull back the curtain on this tragic fairy tale you've been sold. What you are experiencing, my dear, is not an epic romance written in the stars, but rather a meticulously crafted trauma bond. We romanticize the chaos because society has falsely taught us that true passion should feel like a relentless emotional roller coaster. You know those fluttering butterflies in your stomach when he finally texts you after 3 days of deafening silence? They are not a sign of your souls intertwining. In reality, that sensation is merely a chaotic cocktail of extreme cortisol and dopamine flooding your nervous system. He hasn't stolen your heart, he has simply hacked your brain's primal reward center, leaving you starving for his breadcrumbs. Think of it as being hopelessly hooked on a terrible, cheap wine that guarantees a blinding hangover, yet you keep walking back into the same dreadful pub for another glass. When he abruptly withdraws his affection, your anxiety skyrockets. When he tosses you a fleeting moment of warmth, you experience a euphoric high. This cyclical behavior is a textbook psychological snare designed to keep you entirely off balance. You aren't loving him too much, you are surviving a chemical addiction loop. A woman of high value must eventually realize that persistent, gnawing anxiety is never the foundation of a worthy partnership. Genuine attraction feels like peaceful certainty, not a panicked late-night scramble to decipher his mixed signals. When he cancels plans on a Friday, instead of staring blankly at your phone screen, you should be pouring yourself a proper glass of Merlot and opening that book you bought months ago. You must stop mislabeling your nervous system's exhaustion as a romantic connection. Understanding this neurological illusion is the crucial first step to reclaiming your sovereign power, but mere awareness will not break the addiction on its own. If you are truly ready to stop the emotional bleeding and reclaim your sanity, you must prepare yourself for the only brutal protocol that forces a complete system reboot. To initiate this system reboot, we must enforce what I call the absolute no-contact protocol. Let me be perfectly clear, this is not some petty, manipulative game designed to make him miss you or finally realize your worth. If you are using your silence merely as a weapon to punish him, you are still entirely tethered to his validation. True no-contact is nothing short of literal chemical rehabilitation for your own brain. You are finally taking the addict out of the environment that is actively poisoning her. I consistently watch brilliant women sabotage their own healing with what they cleverly disguise as harmless curiosity. You tell yourself, I will just have a quick peek at his Instagram story, as if peering through that digital window means nothing at all. You must understand this. Every single time you check his social media, you violently restart the addiction clock back to absolute zero. You are willingly taking a hit of the very substance you are desperately trying to purge. Blocking his access to you across every conceivable platform is never an act of immaturity. It is the ultimate, ruthless declaration of self-preservation. When the craving strikes on a dreadful Sunday evening to check if he is online, you must treat it like the dangerous withdrawal symptom it is. Instead of typing his name into a search bar like a detective on a hopeless case, put your phone in a drawer, draw a hot bath, and sit with your own thoughts. We simply do not negotiate with the ghost of a man who cannot respect you. Do not expect this protocol to feel fiercely empowering right away. Initially, it will feel remarkably like emotional starvation. Your mind will play cruel, elaborate tricks on you, trying to convince you that perhaps you overreacted or that he has miraculously matured overnight. That is simply your dopamine-depleted brain begging for its familiar toxic fix. A high-value woman recognizes this deceitful mental chatter and outright refuses to break her own ironclad boundaries for a temporary illusion. The most challenging phase of this rehabilitation isn't merely surviving his physical absence, but confronting the sudden deafening void he leaves behind. You will suddenly possess a vast amount of mental real estate and hours that were previously squandered deciphering his vague behavior. This newfound emptiness can be incredibly daunting if left vacant, which brings us to the rather dark, exquisite art of taking all that wasted devotion and ruthlessly weaponizing it. Now that the dreadful noise of his inconsistent presence is finally gone, you are left holding a massive reserve of vital energy. For months, perhaps years, you have been placing this painfully ordinary man on a towering pedestal, worshipping his potential whilst completely starving your own reality. It is time to engage in the dark, exquisite art of tearing him down from that unearned height. We are going to violently reclaim every single ounce of obsessive thought and wasted devotion you poured into him and redirect it strictly towards building your own unshakable empire. You must objectively examine the sheer amount of time you squandered attempting to decipher his endlessly cryptic behavior. Imagine if you had invested those countless hours of analyzing his read receipts and decoding his prolonged silences into your career, your finances, or your own intellect. When the urge to ruminate on his flaws strikes on a Tuesday afternoon, do not sit on your sofa indulging the ghost of a mediocre romance. Channel that obsessive fervor into a pursuit that actually pays you dividends. Focus on a new business venture or curate a life so fiercely captivating that his memory becomes utterly irrelevant. There is a profoundly satisfying irony in using the emotional wreckage he left behind as the very foundation of your future success. This isn't about joining a cheerful local pottery class merely to distract yourself from the pain. It is about a ruthless, unapologetic reclamation of your sovereign focus. He was never a mythical figure worthy of your constant, exhausting adoration. Frankly, he's just a remarkably ordinary chap who likely struggles to manage his own laundry. By removing him from the absolute center of your universe, you forcefully insert yourself back onto the throne where you truly belong. Naturally, taking back this sovereign power requires a level of strict discipline that most women simply refuse to cultivate. It means waking up every morning and actively choosing your own elevation over the comfortable, familiar pity party of feeling abandoned. A high-value woman doesn't merely survive a toxic attachment, she actively metabolizes his sheer disrespect and uses it as high-octane fuel for her ambition. You are essentially starving his ego to nourish your own majestic ascent, turning every tear you once cried into a calculated strategic step towards a much grander existence. However, I will not insult your intelligence by pretending this strategic transformation is entirely seamless or without its profound challenges. As you busy yourself with building this spectacular new reality, the heavy chemical shadow of your former addiction will still attempt to drag you backwards into the dark. The visceral, almost physical ache of emotional withdrawal will inevitably come knocking at your door, fiercely testing your resolve and demanding to be endured. Make no mistake, the visceral pain of emotional withdrawal will eventually hit you, and it will strike with the unforgiving force of a sudden, bitter winter storm. Your brain, utterly starved of its customary chaotic dopamine hits, will practically scream for just one more insignificant interaction. Do not be alarmed when your heart physically aches on an otherwise quiet Wednesday night. This is simply the toxic poison finally leaving your system. The withdrawal is undeniably brutal, but treating it as an endless tragedy only prolongs the suffering. It is, in fact, the necessary crucible of your ultimate healing. A truly high-value woman does not attempt to bypass this agony. She endures it with an elegant, unshakable stoicism. When the overwhelming urge to weep over old WhatsApp messages threatens to consume your evening, do not sink into your duvet with a box of tissues. Instead, permanently delete that digital archive, slip on a sharp coat, and take a brisk, solitary walk in the crisp night air. You must actively train your mind to observe the craving without ever surrendering to its demands, treating the pain not as a conqueror, but merely as a temporary, albeit frightfully annoying, houseguest. And then, quite suddenly, the heavy, suffocating chemical fog will finally begin to lift. You will wake up one spectacularly ordinary morning, switch the kettle on for your morning tea, and realize with a quiet shock that his name wasn't the very first thought to hijack your mind. The absolute clarity that follows this detox is both profoundly liberating and slightly disorienting, as the phantom chains that once dictated your every mood simply dissolve into thin air. You are no longer desperately navigating the turbulent, murky waters of his inconsistency. You are standing firmly on solid ground. As this newfound lucidity sharpens, a fascinating psychological shift occurs. Your once desperate longing mutates into genuine, undeniable repulsion. You will look back at the pathetic breadcrumbs of affection you once so eagerly collected and feel a visceral distaste that you ever settled for such a remarkably poor standard of treatment. It is the jarring, almost comical realization that the man you thought was an irreplaceable king was, in truth, just a terribly average bloke playing childish games in a borrowed crown. You haven't just moved on, you have completely outgrown the very frequency he operates on. This profound repulsion is your final magnificent liberation, the irrefutable proof that the toxic psychological spell has been permanently broken. Yet, acknowledging this hard-won freedom brings us to a rather compelling, albeit daunting crossroads. Once you have completely purged this chemical addiction from your nervous system and violently reclaimed your sovereign power, you must confront an entirely new reality. Because what happens next, once the emotional debris is cleared and the throne is yours again, dictates exactly the caliber of man you will attract tomorrow. I want you to leave a mark in the comments below. What was the exact defining moment the psychological spell finally broke for you? What was the specific catalyst that made you look at that toxic man and feel nothing but absolute cold clarity? Tell me your story. And if you are truly ready to stop falling prey to mediocre men and wish to master the dark psychology of high-value dynamics, I expect you to subscribe to Destiny's Decree. Ensure you activate the notification bell so you never miss another masterclass in strategic elevation. Stay sharp and remember, your empire requires your undivided attention.